Sweet and sassy like Grandma's molassie. This is D Infinity Live. I'm your host, William Big T Thrasher. With me, as always, are our other hosts, Michael Jolly Varhola and Brendan. He's over there, Cass. And tonight, our topic is ruining a good time. All the little faults, foibles, and tiny little things that can completely tank a game session or a campaign. But before we get into that, we do have a couple other things to go over. Brendan, what is going on our website, d-infinity.net this week?
Yeah, Brendan, what's going on over at the website? Huh?
Yeah, Mike, why don't you tell us, since you seem coy about it?
I'll address what's going on over on the website. D-Infinity Online, as usual, has got a ton of new content. I think one of the most fun things was launched by our own D-Infinity Live host, William Thrasher, and that is the Oddities for a Wizard's Tower. So that is going to be following on the footsteps of our best-selling Oddities for a Creepy Old House. So I would encourage people to check that out and post some of their own oddities. This is an interactive thing. So go to Oddities for a Wizard's Tower on D-Infinity Online and post something there. And then I would say that our star player this week is once again game developer Clint Staples. He's got a ton of great material up this week. He's got a couple new RuneQuest articles, including one tying up the alternate magic system that he's been covering. He has got a couple of great posts for the Bash system, which is a superhero system. And he has written up a couple of Barsoom monsters, the Callet and the Bant. Those are from Edgar Rice Burroughs' Mars novels.
And those have been getting a lot of attention on Twitter from the various Barsoom groups, too. So he must have done a good job.
Oh, good job. That's awesome. Yeah. That's good to hear. And then Clint's also been posting bonus content in Call of Cthulhu format, which is also a basic role-playing system format, percentile system format, for his Mythos Society Guide to New England. So, for example, he's got stats for a demon whale up on the site now. So lots of good content. I encourage people to check it out. On average, we've got a couple of new things a day going up on the site.
Yeah, the demon whale is pretty cool. Any time you can get a new kind of undersea monstrosity, I really gravitate towards that.
Oh yeah,
me too. Yeah, a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's going on with our co-publisher Skirmisher this week?
Well, Mike and I switched places, and this was something that I was very excited about last week because we had released a Aegean regional map for Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting. That was a map that was painted for us by Italian fantasy artist Francesca Bayrold. This week is also very exciting for a similar reason. We just released, as of today,
Tuesday we released the Aegean regional map. Today we released the Mediterranean campaign map.
Exactly. So yeah, we just released our Mediterranean campaign map. So with the two of those together, both the Aegean and the Mediterranean campaign maps, you would be able to hold or plot out your adventure in the Aegean region and then the greater Mediterranean region. So those tie in with the Lands of Kos fantasy campaign setting volumes and the Lands Beyond. They're both beautiful. They print out real well, so if you get the digital copies off of Drive-Thru RPG, you would be able to print it out yourself, or you can go to our store at Zazzle.com and get them printed for you on hefty poster paper, which I just did actually. So I bought my own.
And you're real pleased with those, aren't you?
And they look great. So I would recommend checking those out.
And we've got a giveaway this week, too, from Skirmisher. Skirmisher is giving away a free download, speaking of its Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting, a free download of Coast Island. So Coast Island is one of the source books in the Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting. And if anyone goes to the event page for this event, for the show on Facebook, there is a link there that they can click on to download a free copy of Coast Island. They just need to make sure they're logged into drivethrurpg.com or another one bookshelf site, and then all they need to do is click on that link and they can download a free copy of Coast Island. So we hope people enjoy that.
Very cool. Well, I think it is time to move on to our main topic, and that is ruining a good time. All the things that just sabotage everyone's enjoyment of the role-playing hobby. And I guess I find this completely baffling because we're all gamers. We were involved in this hobby because it's supposed to be fun and it's supposed to be entertaining, and yet we seem to constantly do things that interfere with everyone else's fun. And you can have all kinds of different fun with a role-playing game, and I don't think those kinds of fun are mutually unexclusive unless you're that one person who just really gets off on sabotaging games. And regrettably, I think we've all played with that person, and I wish we could be rid of them.
And sometimes it's harder than you think.
We've covered that one player, right? So yeah, we've all run into that kind of situation ourselves. But there, I think, are ways that a game session can get ruined that doesn't necessarily come down to the GM alone or a single player. So it's not necessarily the one GM or the one player. There are some group dynamics that I think can result in a ruined game session. And that's really going to come down to the culture that you've established at the table. What becomes okay and what's not okay, because a bunch of people in groupthink acting together can actually turn a session that would have otherwise been pretty good into one that's mediocre or even negative.
Well, and I agree with you, Brendan, and I think it comes down to not so much the DM, the GM imposing rules, but more the group sort of collectively deciding what they want the rules of the table to be. I mean, I remember, for example, and you'll remember this because it's someone we both know, we had a guest player that came to one of our games, and this was completely new. I'd never seen this before. They sat at the game table and texted on their cell phone the entire game. And it was just bizarre. It was very distracting. And I just couldn't figure it out at all. The idea that you would be at a game where you needed to be paying attention and interacting with other people, and then just jamming away on the buttons on your phone. But that's the kind of thing that can really put a damper on a game. And I think everybody just needs to agree either something like that is okay because it doesn't bother them, or that it's just not okay and that people can't do it.
Cell phones.
Brendan, something you had talked about was kind of the dynamic at the table, and one thing that I will frequently do just to try to create a stable dynamic at the table is when character creation is being done, to really enforce that the players come up with a team dynamic or a party dynamic of coming up at the beginning with what brings their characters together, what's going to keep them working together. And the two reasons I do that is, one, I run a lot of games where teamwork is just absolutely critical to the success of the game.
That's always the case.
Oh yeah, and two, I have run so many games where one little incident happens and then everyone at the table gets paranoid, and it just degenerates into everyone at the table plotting against everyone else at the table, and no adventuring gets done, no heroing gets done, because nobody's concerned about having fun, because everybody is concerned about ensuring their character's survival versus a betrayal that they all see as inevitable.
We had a lot of that in high school games. There were any number of games that I ran that degenerated into literal backstabbing. Everybody was assassinating everybody. Characters were having their rivals and partners arrested. I mean, it was just really deplorable because you really couldn't get into the adventure. If that's the adventure, I mean, that's a good one-off. That might be fun for a one-off or a way to shake things up in the middle of a campaign, sort of turn the players against each other or whatever. But for that to be something that's player-driven is very very negative, I think.
Something that I think GMs should watch out for, and this is a tool that they might be able to use in situations like that, when players are doing something nefarious against each other, you have to be very, very careful about managing the meta information that gets out. So if you happen to be running a session where it's at all likely that your players might do something like steal from another player or do something to harm them in some way, then you want to establish early on some form of communication that you can use that is sneaky enough that players aren't going to notice it's happening, and also hides that meta information from other players. Because what's going to happen is if you have a kleptomaniac rogue, for example, and I think everyone, if you've been gaming for long enough, you've run into that one kid that wants to play the kleptomaniac rogue
and steal from everybody in the party. Instead of just playing the game, he wants to steal from the other people.
He wants to steal shit from the rest of the party, exactly. He wants that extra 100 gold and wants to extort the party for that extra 100 gold when the treasure's being passed out, right?
Yeah.
So in those situations, you can't let the rest of your players know that it's going on. Otherwise, just like Will mentioned, it devolves into rampant paranoia, using that meta information, people calling for spot checks or listen checks or whatever that otherwise wouldn't have been warranted because there's no reason that it would have been prompted by anything going on, that sort of thing. So, passing notes can work, especially if you've established early in the game that you can pass notes back and forth either from the GM to players or from players to the GM whenever you want something to surreptitiously be passed. I play a digital game, so people can text me. So that's actually really convenient.
Well, when we play our official skirmisher games, almost in their entirety now, they're played on a Google Plus Hangout, which we're using for our interface right now.
Yeah.
So if you've got Facebook open, you can just like you said, instant message the GM or vice versa. And you and I have actually done that quite a bit when we're gaming. Because as we mentioned on the show before, a lot of times when one of us is GMing, the other has actually helped develop the scenario that they're playing in.
Right.
And you and I, actually, we've had 0% problems with that. We're both very professional, but being able to trade information with each other without letting on that we know what's going on is kind of key.
Yeah, it helps for, if you're a game developer, stuff like that helps with the play testing as well. If you notice something and you need to share with another developer that's in your game development group that maybe we should tweak something because you're seeing something go awry, you can pass that note too while
something you might have thought through or whatever.
Right.
Oh, and one other thought with the in-party paranoia. What we talked about is kind of assuming that paranoia happens in response to something that's gone on in the game. One thing I've discovered, if you're running a game where paranoia, sneaking around and doing things behind other characters' backs is an integral part of the game, such as paranoia or certain World of Darkness settings.
Or if everybody's playing a rogue, and you're trying to, and the point of the game is to advance as officers in the Thieves Guild or whatever.
Oh yeah. But like if you're doing a game where it's known from the beginning that that's an integral part of the game, just fence with the secrecy. Everyone knows everyone's out to get everybody else, so do absolutely everything above the table.
Those things aren't inherently bad. Where they become bad is when your characters are in the ravine in front of the Caves of Chaos, and they're supposed to be trying to figure out which cave leads to the Kobold or the Goblin Cave, and they start stealing from each other or backstabbing each other or whatever. That's where it breaks down. And I mean, there are characters that are just homicidal as a matter of course. I mean, look at Ollie, right? His attitude is, oh, your special ability is stealing? My special ability is killing. You stole from me, so roll for initiative. And that's it. The game's just essentially, the game you wanted to run as a DM is over.
Well, that's a whole other thing. I've had a lot of sessions just tank because one or more players decides to play a murder hobo. And everything, the slightest thing escalates immediately to somebody getting killed. And and the whole campaign gets derailed because I've run a lot of urban fantasy, a lot of modern day stuff. And if you gun somebody down on the street, someone's going to hear those gunshots and someone's going to call the police.
Right.
And the next thing you know, a campaign that was supposed to be about investigating the theft of some sort of idol from a museum becomes about one horribly guilty person and 5 innocent people on the run from the cops, and then the state police, and then the National Guard. Because every time a law enforcement official shows up, they just get murdered.
Yep. Right. Well, you add stars. It's like Grand Theft Auto. You get up to 5 stars, and eventually they start sending tanks, and you die.
Right.
Actually, one of the most spectacular campaign endings I ever had, it had kind of escalated to that point, and so I just decided I just kept throwing bigger and bigger things. Eventually, the army came after them, then NATO came after them, and I purposefully let things escalate to such a ridiculous point that all the world's superpowers decided to focus their orbital lasers on the spot where the PCs were standing. And vaporized Cleveland.
There you go.
No loss.
Although by that point we all
no loss.
punch drunk that we all really liked that ending. Nobody felt like they were screwed over. Everyone kind of liked the idea that their handful of hackers were badass enough that the entire world had to unite against them and nuke them from orbit.
Now, when NATO went after them, did Turkey pitch in, or did they sort of scale back? Because that sort of seems to be their norm anymore.
There was a resolution. There was a resolution of support.
Got it.
Oh, we've gotten some interesting comments from our viewers because we asked them, what things shut down your enjoyment of the game, and Jack Butler said pedantry and rules lawyering. Do you have any comments in those areas?
Oh.
Yeah. I think he's right. There's that fine line. There's a fine line. I had a character. Okay, I'd say that he's right, and the opposite is true as well. I had a character in a game who, for maybe 3 years, played a bard, and she hated playing a bard. She hated it because there was never anything she could do, and she would just bitterly say at the beginning of every combat, I sing. And that was all she would do. And she had never once read the description of the Bard class. She hadn't read the description of the Bard class. She didn't know any of the special abilities that were associated with being able to sing. The effects would persist for, however many rounds after she stopped singing so that she could do other things. If she could cast a spell, she would do that. But of course, her character wasn't very good in combat, so she hated the character, and that she was there because the party needed a bard. So that's the opposite end of what he's asking about. It's the character that simply won't learn the rules at all.
Yeah, that's something as a GM that really ruins my fun when I have to stop GMing to look up something in a book that the player should have looked up seconds, minutes, hours, or in some cases sessions ago.
Yeah.
I've had players where there's one power they always want to use and they never look up how that power works.
Is it called Great Cleave?
What's that?
Is the power called Great Cleave? Do they want to use it every time they go into combat?
We're ragging another one of our players again. He looks at his sheet of going to attack, and he sees Great Cleave written in his feats. He says, all right, I'm going to take my axe and I'm going to Great Cleave. And Brendan always goes out and says, no, wait, that's something that happens if you kill an opponent, and then he tries to explain it, and I'll be GMing, I say, ooh, that sounds good. Okay, go ahead and roll for a Great Cleave. Ooh, you hit with your Great Cleave. You missed your Great Cleave. I just let him have his way. He can say he Great Cleaves as much as he wants. I don't give a shit. But it sets Brendan off because he always says it, and we've explained it to him, maybe 200 times.
He refuses to learn. He refuses to learn what it means, and every single one of his characters has had on his character sheet Great Cleave.
Right.
Every single one. They all know how to Great Cleave. And,
So I guess the question was, does a rules lawyer ruin the game? And I guess Brendan and I are saying, God, I wish we had some rules lawyers. I wish we had some players who would just read the damn book. Worst case scenario, a rules lawyer can ruin the game, and I've had them. I've had them over the years. But most recently, the problem has been the player that will not read the rules and will not even be a rules intern. So that's actually more of a problem in my games than the actual rules lawyer.
Yeah, I found that with a rules lawyer, if you can channel that kind of drive of the rules lawyer, you can actually turn them into an asset. Because that one rule that one player will never look up, that I don't want to stop the game to look up.
Right.
The rules lawyer might be able to recall that instantly, and you can turn that into an asset. They can ask that player and know that they're getting it from an authoritative source. I find I have a bigger problem with the player or the GM, actually. I've had it for both ends, where they try to make everything about the rules. You can't just have a role-play encounter. You can't have a puzzle encounter.
Right.
Everything has to turn into something where there can be a dice roll, preferably a very one-sided dice roll.
Right.
Yeah. Now, I actually had a twist on the whole rules lawyer thing that got pretty aggravating. We had one of our players, and he's a friend of mine. He's a great guy. I love him. You remember Ho, Brendan?
Yeah, I remember Ho.
Yeah, so he was a Brazilian bartender, which was nice because he could make us fun drinks for the games. That was always fun. And he's a good role player, and he's a brilliant guy. But he would be a rules lawyer in the sense that he would open up a book and he would read a rule. And I would think, wait a minute, I didn't think that's the way it worked. It just didn't. Well, the son of a bitch would keep a stack of old version books on the table with him, and I would actually catch him reading me rules out of an old version book because that was the one that had the rule that was convenient for him. And I found that to be really inflammatory. So he would open up the 3.0 book, and he would read something and be like, wow, it doesn't sound like. I said, I remember that's how they used to do it in 3.0. But the bastard's reading it to me, and then I'd look over at the spine of the book he is reading and say, wait a minute. You've got the new book right in front of you. And then he'd give me this sort of little shit-eating smirk. He was doing it on purpose. I mean, there was no question about it. So that was sort of like, that's a twist on the rules lawyer. That's the perverse rules lawyer. The cherry-picking lure.
I've also had folks, and this is because you need a certain amount of leeway with the system, right? They're more guidelines rather than hard and fast laws. And someone who is unwilling to let a game go or let it go along its course, even if you fudged a rule or bent a rule to make it fit better into the story,
right.
That's when someone who's over obsessed with the rules is going to drag down the game. When they just can't let it go, the story plays out just fine. I never do any of these things because I want the players to lose, because it's not a point game. It's not a competitive game. There is no losing.
Right.
So, if you want to do something competitively, play chess. In a role-playing game, it's all about the story you're telling together. So
that's exactly it.
That's when, to talk specifically on topic, that's when those folks really get mad. And I agree with you. When they're trying to deliberately sort of misinterpret something to kind of suit their purpose, or if they can't let a rule go because they remember it working one way and they think that whatever you've done in your scenario isn't 100% to that. That's when, because I fudge things for players just as much as for myself.
And you actually have two prevailing mindsets going with rules lawyers. I guess I should point that out. One is that you'll have someone like my buddy Ho, who's trying to pervert the rules or use the rules to gain himself advantage in the game. He's not mad about anything. He's not angry. When you rule against him, he just kind of smiles and he backs down. But then you've got the person for whatever reasons, they're OCD or they've just got this regimented view of how the world is supposed to be, they get mad when they're actually angry because the rules bent. I mean, people who have watched the show probably remember the time that I accidentally, in my first D20 game session that I ever DM'd, I accidentally gave a monster an extra attack of opportunity. And my brother knew the rules so much better than me that not only did he catch that, he became enraged and threw a player's handbook at me. That was how he responded. So he wasn't rules lawyering because it gave him an advantage. He was enraged that this was a game and the rules needed to be followed, and they hadn't been.
So I'm guessing Ho is lawful evil. He's deliberately twisting the rules for his own personal gain.
No.
Your brother...
Go on.
Okay,
no,
I think
Ho is actually the opposite. He's actually chaotic neutral or chaotic good. The actual rule is irrelevant to him. He's twisting the rules and cherry-picking them just to give himself an advantage. He has no respect for the rules whatsoever.
But the fact that he's working within the confines of the rules makes me think lawful evil. But I'll give you your point. I think your brother makes a lawful neutral.
Lawful neutral or lawful evil, because the rules for him are actually about imposing unhappiness. That's part of it for him. It isn't that he's serving the rule, it's that he sees the rule as a device for making others unhappy. And that's why he's applying it. So I think that's part of the dynamic going on with him.
Oh, we got another comment from Richard Penwarden, friend of the show, who one of the things that ruins his enjoyment of a game is player knowledge versus character knowledge, especially when there's one player that just knows a setting or scenario inside and out. I've got a simple method for trying to manage the player knowledge versus character knowledge, because it can affect things in a lot of ways, especially when you have a setting that's so big and so sprawling that what the GM knows and what the players knows might be completely different. It might be two different parts of a Venn diagram. But my general policy is, if the knowledge is in the core rulebook, if it is anywhere in the core rulebook, then if you think your character knows it, I won't ask questions. Your character can just know that. I will assume whatever is in the rulebook can be considered public knowledge, or at least the kind of knowledge that the people who go adventuring have. It's once you start to go outside of the core rulebook, if that knowledge is specifically described as being secret, clandestine, hard to come by, I will offer to let the player come up with like an in-game explanation to justify their character knowing that information, or we can handle it with a knowledge or intelligence roll and just hope that they can be a good sport. But I think this is also kind of related to the issue that people might have a different level of intelligence than their character, and in my campaigns, I just dispense with the notion that you will play a character that's more or less clever than you are.
Right. Mike and I think, take that kind of ambivalent sort of stance towards it, more or less, because we run games in the Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting, which is based on classic Greek mythology.
Right.
And more or less, if anyone is read up enough to know any of that history or background,
good for them.
Let them know it.
And some of what they know will be wrong.
Right.
Just like some of what they would know in real life would be wrong, so that's fine. That's all great. But if they happen to know that holding up a mirror in front of a Medusa might catch its gaze and turn it to stone, well, hell, they would have heard the legend of Perseus. The whole idea that their character wouldn't know something like that, or that you've got to make it so that doesn't really work on Medusae if it says, in the monster manual that it does. No, that's all fine. That's the kind of instant. If one of us bumped into a vampire in real life, we'd sure as hell be trying to jam a stake in its heart.
Yeah.
So
I mean, or a game-specific case, if you run into a golem that has the appearance of Achilles, and there happens to be a little stream in the room, and you decide to bathe in that stream because you're hoping it'll grant you some kind of protection,
you just happen
Anyone
to
who
know
knows the myth of Achilles knows
of
why
Achilles.
Achilles was invincible.
I mean,
Dipped
where
in the
I
river Styx.
where I draw the line is when it's modern meta knowledge, and the character wants to try to apply their modern knowledge of geography or physics or history or whatever to something. And then you just got to say, well, your character wouldn't know that. Your character wouldn't know that. But if it's something that ties in with actual, and that's why it's fun for us to be running a scenario that has real mythology rather than just the kind of made-up hodgepodge of crap that a lot of campaign settings do.
So, Mike, I came from an engineering school. So I play with a lot of engineers and scientists. And that's something you got to be real careful. If you play with people like that, they will break out formulas in the middle of your game and try to figure out the physics of a situation. They will try to do that. And you have to set the tone real early.
Right.
That you're trying to tell a story that feels like, and this is just an example, you're trying to tell a story that feels like an action movie, right? And you've seen enough action movies to know that the physics aren't spot on. When you don't set that expectation early on, when you start playing with that sort of person, they're going to, because they tend to be detail-oriented, they will probably gravitate towards photorealism. And then they'll start breaking out formulas, and they'll say, okay, well, this is my acceleration, so this is my mass, multiply those two together, this is my force, over this distance, this is how much power and so on I have. And they'll do that, and it'll absolutely bog down a game.
Right.
And if there's a bunch of them together, they'll start arguing about the equations that they're using to make sure that they're using the right equation.
Right. Horrible.
It's terrible.
Actually, related to that, I have had my good time ruined by a GMs that absolutely refuse to let you act on knowledge that you have as a player. And I'm not talking about some obscure thing you've read from a book, but perfect example. I was playing in a horror game where the short of it is our antagonists were werewolves. The DM's like, no, you don't know that werewolves are shapeshifters, and no, you don't know that silver hurts werewolves.
But everybody knows it.
Why not? We know that they're werewolves. We've seen the movies. It just so happens that in this case, what's in the movies matches what's in the game.
Right.
Do we live in a world where no werewolf movies or werewolf legends exist?
Right.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make any sense because there are actual werewolves, so you can guarantee there would be a werewolf legend or two if they exist. Somebody has to have screwed up at some point. A werewolf has to have screwed up, and there has to be a legend somewhere. So what you do, if you're a clever DM, is you say, yeah, they're vulnerable to silver. You break out your silver weapons, and it turns out they're vulnerable to aluminum.
That's one way to do it. I actually once did a game where they thought it was a werewolf. It in fact was not a werewolf. So when the werewolf, when the wolf's bane and the silver bullets and things weren't doing anything special to the monster, at first the players thought that they were being dicked over, but then later they discovered that what they were fighting wasn't a werewolf. It was actually this genetically modified. It was a result of genetic experimentation that involved human, baboon, and wolf being dead.
Though actually, using that kind of player knowledge, that can actually be a lot of fun. I know Brendan, probably you haven't, Will, because you don't actually read our materials. My story, Bloodsuckers, in Swords of Coast Hecaton, is about a party of characters that go after a band of vampires. And this is a little bit of a spoiler, but it's still a fun story, and I think people might have fun with it. They basically interpret everything they see as in terms of this party that they're tracking, this band that they're tracking, being vampires. and they use every kind of vampire killing technique they can on them. And it comes as a horrifying surprise to them at the end of their adventure when they realize these weren't vampires that they'd gone after at all. They weren't actually vampires in any way. But there are things that happen. One of them fires a crossbow bolt at the back of the character, and it's deflected off of the character. Oh my God, they're immune to normal weapons. Well, it just hit her breastplate and was deflected by it. Another one, they end up staking through the heart. They said, well, that killed it. It had to be a vampire. We stake anyone through the heart,
Right.
and it's going to kill them. So they keep drawing conclusions that what they're dealing with are vampires. So using that kind of knowledge, leading them to believe they're dealing with a mythological creature, that can be fun. It didn't prevent them from wiping out the creatures they were battling. It just made them jump through all sorts of hoops that were completely unnecessary.
All right. Well, we've got another comment from a friend of the show, Amanda Call. What tanks her good time is players or GMs using the game as an excuse to harass, screw over, or power trip over other players. This is one of the absolute worst. One of the worst gaming experiences I've ever had came from this. Came from a player who just seemed to want to use their character to bully everybody else at the table. And I have seen that. I have seen so many different forms of that. Those are the kinds of players that I won't even try to reason with. I just won't invite back to my table.
Sure, yeah. And I don't deal with a lot of that anymore. A lot of that stuff is the kind of crap that we ended up dealing with in high school and college. And now, like Brendan and I always say, don't game with dicks. I mean, it's that simple. Once somebody is marked, we know. Or, sometimes there'll be a dick that, you've got to game with because they're a relative who's visiting on the weekend that you've got your game day. But then there are ways to deal with it. And you've had to master those techniques too.
Yeah.
And actually, related to that, friend of the show Heath from Australia had wanted to point out when a player brings their kids to the game, and he's not talking about teenage kids. He's talking about when they bring little kids that are just going to be disruptive to the whole gaming experience.
I have mixed feelings about that. I think generally I'm against it. But I have to point out that Brendan was probably 5 the first time he got dragged to one of our D&D games, and it wasn't that he wasn't at fault, and his dad wasn't at fault. His mom just didn't want his dad leaving the house and going and playing D&D for the weekend if he wasn't going to take the kid along. But that ended up turning out pretty well in the long run. So I don't particularly like kids, and I don't like them showing up at a game or being the source of disruption. But on the other hand, you got to raise them right, and being exposed to a role-playing game and getting socialized in that way is actually a positive thing. So I do have mixed feelings about that, which might sound strange to people who know me, because people who know me know I don't like children. But I do have mixed feelings about that.
Well, I say at the age of 5, you could potentially play the game. On some level, you could sit at the table and play the game. But then, there's also when you've played in a game and one person has a baby and they bring their toddler to the game. And the whole day just becomes about keeping the toddler from choking to death on the dice, and from running off and injuring itself, and from kicking the table when someone tries to pick it up.
I think in general, it's a bad idea. I mean
to be honest, if you're doing an adult thing, that's just rude whether you're gaming or not. Those people are obnoxious.
Right.
Cough up some fucking cash and get a babysitter. That's just annoying whether you're gaming or not.
Well, just acknowledge that this is something you decided to do with your life. So for a certain number of years, you're just not going to do the same things that you thought were fun. Sorry, sucks to be you. You wanted to breed? Well, now raise your fucking kids. You're not going to be playing D&D with your friends anymore for a while.
But people will do stuff like this with like puppies as well. And this is something that can bring a game to a screeching halt for sure. It's anybody who's bringing in something to the session. They're crossing into across the stage, and they've brought something that is intentionally distracting.
Right. Right.
Someone bringing a video game along with them, for example. I mentioned a puppy or something like that, or babies. It's all the same thing. It's something that really it cannot, no matter what you do, it cannot contribute.
Right. Right.
And so because
nor is its intention to contribute.
It necessarily has to be a distraction. It necessarily has to bring the game down. Because even if you, for example, put your dog in another room, you're gonna have to check on it from time to time. Just don't do that, right?
Yeah, and honestly, I would say that you shouldn't have anything at the table that doesn't have to do with the game. And I've seen more distractions. We had a friend who I'm not going to mention, but I'm not going to mention him by name. But he ended up marrying a woman from a third world country, and she was. This is true. God's honest truth. He kept her on the loop on everything he was doing. She knew when game days were. She would calculate the time from the third world hellhole she lived in, and she would call during game days. She would call him on his cell phone at my house during game days, and she was doing it to disrupt the game. And he would answer the phone, and he'd be like, they're talking on her on his cell phone with her, to Southeast Asia during our game. So very disruptive, and that was on him. It was on her, of course, because she was the inspiration for the Asian succubus monster that we've got posted to the Infinity Online. But it was on him too, because he didn't need to bring his phone and he didn't need to answer it, and he sure as hell didn't need to tell her when he was going to be at the game.
Right.
But that always used to bring things down. Absolutely. And God bless him. Last time we had him in a game, this was a decade ago that all this happened with the cell phone. Last time we had him in the game, his wife, as soon as he got pad to play with us online, his wife made him take the 3 kids and go out to the playground. So the poor bastard's trying to play D&D with us on the playground while his kids are running around in circles around him. I mean, it was just awful. More so for him than for us, but it was no treat for us either.
Yeah, this is actually where one of my own bets that nobody gets to watch. If you're in the room when a game is happening, you are playing that game or you are somewhere else.
Yeah,
and
we've had that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
The girlfriend that gets brought along, and
yes.
Well, she's only here to watch. And I say, nope, isn't going to happen. She can either play or she can leave. And then we just don't invite that person back again because they don't understand what a role-playing game is all about.
Right.
And in some cases,
what the hell? It's not going to turn into a porno movie. There's nothing to see. You either play or you don't play.
And in some cases, those outside people who are brought in who aren't really into the hobby, I have played in and run session, that person intentionally tries to sabotage the event so that
of course that's why they're there.
Thing that they don't want to do will be gone, so that then they can kind of force everybody to do the thing that they want to do.
Right.
Yeah. No, I was going to mention the girlfriend that's brought along as well, who might play, might be there to watch, but is going to be disinterestedly texting her friends the whole time anyway.
Right. Or saying, when does this end? Does this end? When do we leave?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that with boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, fiancés, brothers, sisters. It is.
Yeah.
That person that's brought in, it can be very disruptive, especially if they're antagonistic to the idea of gaming. Our final comment's going to come from Joshua T. Brumbeck. What tanks their experience is when a GM shuts down clever thinking completely just because it doesn't fit in with their idea of the game. And yes, I've seen a lot of this. I mean, this kind of ties in with the one GM I had that wouldn't let us know that silver hurt werewolves, even though that's been part of folklore for like 300 years now.
Right.
And that wasn't even clever thinking. That's just knowing the genre that we were playing in.
So just to play devil's advocate, I agree with his comment that a GM that shuts down clever thinking because it doesn't fit with his idea of how the game should run, that's not good. But just to play devil's advocate, that is a comment coming from a player. From the GM's point of view, that could be a player, and their clever thinking could be meta-knowledge or the fact that they've read the non-players' source books for the game. It could be that what they're calling clever is something that the GM would legitimately consider to be disruptive because it's meta-knowledge or things that they shouldn't be being clever with. One of the players who was bringing all of their advanced knowledge of physics to the game that Brendan was talking about could very well say later, well, you know, I would have enjoyed his game, but he really tried to suppress cleverness.
Right.
So I'm not saying he's wrong. He's right if that's what's really happening, but I would say that that could be an expression of something that the player is doing too.
A lot of times, and you know, a lot of times clever thinking is not really clever thinking. It's trying to get a bullshit advantage out of something that's really not applicable.
Right.
It's, I've got such and such a feat, or this is such and such a situation. Do I get a bonus?
And then for whatever reasons, the GM just might want to move things along. He's not trying to kill the characters.
Right.
He's not trying, but he just needs something to tie up a certain way so it can keep moving, and doesn't want to deal with cleverness. Just needs to get to the next step. Sometimes, you know, there's just too damn much cleverness. So, I mean, like I said, I agree with him to the extent that he's right. But I would say that players who are wrong might express themselves in the same way that he has.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. I guess it is on how you look at cleverness. I mean, it's as far as I'm concerned, cleverness really is just good, quick thinking. And I think, you know, what we're talking about, it's the difference between remembering from your high school science class that copper is resistant to sulfuric acid, so you want to try to find a copper pot you can use to carry some sort of acid weapon in. That's really cool, as opposed to wanting to fashion all copper armor in the belief that it will make you 100% immune to all acid-based attacks, so you can go after that copper dragon. Right. Or whatever dragon has the acid attacks.
But, you know, I mean, how would I handle that just as a what if? I'd absolutely do that. Let them do that. I'd give them whatever bonus they wanted on saves against acid. They could have +4, +8, and I'd give a minus equal to that to the value of the armor, because copper is softer and not as resilient as steel. So sure, I'd let them do that, but it just wouldn't be a one-way street. There'd have to be a trade-off.
Well, I mean, that's a good game balanced answer. But I suppose what I'm thinking about is I have on multiple instances come up against players who they have that moment of cleverness, but they essentially believe that they've had an idea so brilliant that it's an indestructible idea.
Right.
Sure.
For example, I was running a pirate-based game. This was actually a LARP, and there was a treasure chest that several different factions wanted. So at one point, an individual got access to the treasure chest and decided, oh, well, wait a minute. It's established my character can breathe underwater, right? Yes, that is the case. Well, then I'm just going to sink this treasure chest in the deepest part of the lagoon. And thinking that no one would look there, because who'd be crazy enough to just sink the treasure chest, and two, well, who could possibly get down there to get it out if they ever found it?
Right.
And that's what they did, completely forgetting that our system has a luck mechanic, and you can always cash in a luck point to get a hint from the GM, and a player did cash in a luck point. Can I get a hint about where the treasure chest is? And from that hint, they figured out, oh, someone must have sunken it in the lagoon. And then they found another player who could breathe underwater and retrieved it. And the guy's like, well, how did they get the chest? How did they get the chest? They swam down and got it. Well, how did they find it? I sank it. No one would think to look for it. They thought to look for it.
And that sort of points to something that I've dealt with in my games. the players who, despite the fact that they always succeed because the GM is on their side, want to imagine the GM is screwing them over and become indignant if the GM won't explain things to them that they can't understand. If there are things their characters can't figure out, they just become indignant and sullen. And I ended up, for years having a couple of players in particular where I would just have to explain things because if I didn't, the game couldn't keep moving. And that was really demeaning and disruptive. And, once again, don't game with dicks. You just don't want people like that. But the whole idea that you wouldn't just, have faith that they're, I can't drive from here to the store without seeing or witnessing or encountering all sorts of things I don't understand. Just in my modern day world, I see stuff and I don't necessarily know what it is or why it's there or why would you? So the whole idea that in a fantasy world, going into some sort of subterranean, labyrinth, that you would just intuitively understanding everything that's going on around you, not true.
Yeah, that is actually a very good point. And actually, in that game, I was running with the werewolf that wasn't actually a werewolf. There were two players at the table. I had to assure them, if you play through the end of the scenario, you will find out why your silver bullets did nothing to the monster.
Right.
And everyone, keep in mind, I said it looks like a werewolf. I never said, as the GM, it is a werewolf. You all jumped to that conclusion when it looked all big and wolf-like.
I mean, right. I guess when I'm running a game, once I describe something, I want the characters to accept that and then try to use their skills, or that's where their cleverness needs to come in. Really be clever. Figure out the situation. Don't become all indignant because it doesn't seem to make sense and make me go meta and explain it to you.
Right.
Well, I think we've had a pretty good conversation about ruining a good time, although I did want to ask, did any of you have any final thoughts on the subject, or final thoughts on anything in general?
Well, who are you calling on? Who's doing the first final thought and who's doing the final?
Well, Mike, you always do the last final thought, so I thought we'd do the first final thought to Brendan.
Last final thought. But, okay, so Brendan's up.
Oh, my final thought.
And it doesn't have to be on ruining the game. Remember, final thoughts can be about anything.
Well, right. Go buy my maps, damn it. They're beautiful and they're awesome. So do that and vindicate all of my effort.
They are beautiful. They are beautiful maps.
I'm not exaggerating. They are in fact beautiful. They were painted out with acrylic paint on like wooden boards and stuff, and then made lovingly by me into posters that you can use in your games. So go buy my damn maps there. That's
and they're on DriveThruRPG. DriveThruRPG, they can be downloaded, and you can print them out on your home printer or at Kinko's or whatever. And on Zazzle, you can actually order print copies of the posters.
Yeah, I guess my own final thought is, no matter how good of a time you're having, remember that you're not the only person playing the game. The other players, the GM, they're all there to have a good time too. And no matter how excited you are, try to be aware that your fun should not be coming at the expense of the fun of anyone else at the table. Just try to keep that kind of awareness. What my goal as both a player and a GM is to make sure that whatever I'm enjoying only helps to build up the enjoyment of the people around me. That's really where an okay campaign or an okay session can become truly great, when you are putting as much effort into everyone else's fun as you are into your own. And also, as long as we're talking about things we draw, this would be a mandrel with wings.
I love that picture. That is hilarious.
Yeah. With the chalkboard around its neck. Some of you may have seen the colored version on my social media feed. You will be seeing this in an upcoming Skirmisher product. We will, of course, be revealing more information about that in the future. And Mike, as is traditional, you have the final thought.
I would say that Brendan and I, in particular, put a lot of time and effort into owning our social media and our websites. So go ahead and like the Skirmisher Publishing Facebook page because we're posting it every day about the things that we're developing and about the things we're releasing. Like the D Infinity Facebook page because we post it about the new content that's up on the website. So those are two really, really, really good ways to keep track of everything that we're doing. And we've really been using Twitter a lot more recently. And I personally have been posting to Twitter about things that I've been developing or things that we release. And a lot of times the first look on new Skirmisher releases is coming out of my account on Twitter. So follow me on Twitter. I am Michael Varhola, at Michael Varhola, one word, on Twitter. So follow me there and follow Skirmisher and D Infinity on Twitter and Facebook because we've put a lot of effort into developing those tools and we're doing some fun stuff with them.
All right. So for myself, William T. Thrasher, for Michael Jollifer-Ola, and for Brendan Cass, this has been D Infinity Live, and we will see you all next week.